You are listening to Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour, a podcast released on the first 3 Wednesdays of the month. Family crisis, relationship crisis, addiction crisis, no two crisis situations are the same. They vary by family, individual, and relationship. They can encompass complex family dynamics, emotional distress, anger issues, and entitlements, and often involve substance abuse. This podcast addresses these issues and others surrounding the addiction epidemic currently plaguing this country and the world. There is hope and help.
Are you stuck, scared, or unsure of what to do next? If a situation with a loved one, spouse, or even a child has started to spiral, possibly becoming dangerous or threatening, it's time to seek help. My name is Scott H. Silverman. I help families navigate crisis situations. I'm the person you turn to in order to get you and your loved ones unstuck.
Welcome back to the show. This is Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour. I'm Michael Glenn Moore, Scott's co-host. Scott, how's it going today?
It is well, Michael. It's good to see you. And we have a awesome guest that's going to be talking to us today and hopefully putting us at peace on earth with just a few minutes of her experience, strength, and health. No, it's been an interesting week. I don't know if you're watching politics or not, but all I am is frustrated. But watching our legislative leaders act like children, fighting with each other and pointing the finger, slinging mud, throwing rocks, and blaming each other. And I'm just wondering, who is running things? How are they getting things done with all the fighting that they're doing? It's just really, really amazing. And watching what's her name, Marjorie Taylor Greene the other day, with her testimony in court, she had 50 times she said she didn't remember. This isn't political. And then it turns out that the judge who has to pass, judgment soon is running for re-election. So it's almost like everybody has got a separate agenda other than the agenda that they're appearing in front of the public for. It's almost like, everyone's got a back door they're coming through. They're all behind the curtain. So, and the topic at my home group this morning was frustration. What do you do with it? So, I've had some time to reflect on that, but otherwise I'm doing fine. My youngest has COVID after all these years, and she's in New York by herself, but she's doing okay. She doesn't really have any major issues because she's been taking her vaccines. So we're just a little stressed about that, but I'm sure she'll be fine. Anyway, so that's kind of it for me, Michael. I'm doing well. So let's just jump into it. You ready?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, welcome everybody to Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour. We just say that out loud because that's what our backdrop says. So I get a chance to sound it out and hopefully I never forget. Again, I want to make sure you get my phone number up front, 619-993-2738, 619-993-2738. Call or text anytime. And we know, because Michael pushes this thing out a lot, and that we've had a few thousand people that have seen our podcast, and most of you aren't
Over
calling.
7.
So, pardon me?
Over 7,000.
Over 7,000. So we know that either the information we're giving you is helping you solve your problems, right, or you're afraid to make that phone call. Mm-hmm. And since we know you through your IP address, we will find you and we will come help you. If you
all right, now that's
okay.
Don't get us in trouble with the FCC.
All right, no threats. Michael knows your IP address. I don't. We don't actually track any of that. So today we have a young lady that I've just met recently and have just become very fond of, and you'll understand why in a few minutes. Gina, I want to say Tabrizy, is that correct?
Tabrizy.
Okay. Tabrizy.
Yeah, Tabrizy.
Tabrizy. Well,
yeah, like Tabrizy.
No, I got it. But I'm Jewish. What happens is we can't really form our tongue in a certain way.
There you go.
Of the kosher food. Anyway, I'm going to read a little something about her because I think it's pretty impressive, and I think you all would want to know this. Gina H. Tabrizy is a licensed family marriage therapist with over 20 years of experience, knowledge, and expertise in the areas of addiction, trauma, and codependency. She's co-founder of Harmony Hills in Laguna Hills, California, and her desire to deliver the best possible care, she gained several specialties: EMDR, certified hypnotherapist, director of psychodrama, inner child work, PIT, PMLD training, and she acts as a part-time professor at Cal State Long Beach, teaching introduction to and advanced techniques in psychodrama. I know somebody, I can't remember her name, who does that, and has been doing it for years. It's very well known. Yeah. I'm sure you know her. I'll remember and I'll let you know offline. So, Gina, rather than me try to impress people with what little I know about you. Tell us your story. Tell us what we want to know about Gina, why you do the work you do, and maybe something that actually happened in your life that caused you to pivot, to commit, it looks like, most of your, adult life to helping others.
Yeah. Thank you.
And welcome, by the way, to Happy Hour.
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, we just met the other night. I had you come on the radio with me on the Recovery Show, which is a local radio program here in Orange County that I took over probably 6 or 7 months back. And it's very funny. My story begins with immigrant parents, is how my story begins. My parents migrated here from Cuba. They were salt of the earth, hardworking, well-meaning, wanted freedom. My father, is interestingly enough, was drafted while living in Cuba, from Cuba, to fight in the Korean War for the United States Army. And people always go, how do you draft a Cuban to go fight? Because my father did not know he was actually second generation American. So at 18 years old, he gets a draft letter and he gets told, you're going to go fight. And he tells his dad, this is ridiculous. I mean, hey, look at these Americans. They're so crazy. They don't even know what they're doing and what's happening here, how I'm going to go to fight for them. And then his dad said, well, actually, you're American because I was born in the United States in Key West, Florida. So the journey of my dad being pulled from his country and what he knew, going into war, being exposed to that culture, to the American culture, and then coming back. As he was coming back, Batista was being overthrown and Castro was coming in, and my father could smell the communism, as he would say over and over again. And so in that was a very traumatic experience for him, to watch his country being just overthrown and decimated, that he chose at that time to ask my mother, look, if you want to marry me, he had proposed and she had said yes. She goes, the only way we're doing this is if we leave and we go live in the United States. And so by the grace of God and that choice that my father made, we missed Castro probably by about 2 weeks. And so I am blessed to be born here in American and free as they come, I guess you should say. And so their journey was always one of overcoming challenges. And so I would watch them my whole young life, just beating all the odds. We fought a lot of prejudice when we first entered, believe it or not. When my parents went to New York, there was a lot of Latins, but they were not Cuban. And so nobody knew what a Cuban was and what they were about. So, whenever there's a new culture that steps in, they always get attacked in some way, right? And so we then migrate to Miami. At that time, Miami was not the mecca of Latinos that it is now. And so we faced a lot of prejudice. I like to tell the story. I remember walking into a store with my parents, and I'm born here, had never been to Cuba. To this day, shamefully, I have not stepped foot on Cuban soil, but I'm determined to do it before I pass. And I walk into a store and there's a sign in the window that says, no dogs, no Cubans. And I remember just the utter shame and fear that came over me. And as I explained to my parents, had no explanation to me to tell me, why are we so hated? What do they hate me for? Like, what have we done? And I remember in grade school, my maiden name is Hernandez, and I would lie and say that my parents adopted me because I used to get punked in the playground and pushed around and stuff like that. So these little stories, I'm telling you, they're not the full gamut of the lifelong experiences that Gina would see, but they laid a foundation for me of what it is to be the underdog and also what it is to persevere and to prevail. So everything in me was about the fight, fighting the good fight. And my parents taught me how to fight the fight with dignity. It was never about violence. It was never about belittling others. It was never about you're going to get your position and your favor by taking other people down. It was you're going to win them with love and kindness. You're going to win them over with your graciousness. And so I was so, in many ways, I was just enamored with the way that my parents could hold their head high in the face of such degrading and discriminatory actions, it really infused almost like the social worker advocate in me. Even though I'm a marriage and family therapist, I very much have a lot of social worker in me and activism. And so I started to have this huge desire to help anyone who needed to be helped. So I'm 12 years old and I start sneaking, you guys will relate to this, the cord from the kitchen. So we had a kitchen phone mounted on the wall. It was yellow because it's the 70s. And I could stretch the cord all the way into my bedroom and close the door so my parents wouldn't hear my conversations. This generation can't even relate, right? And so I would get the phone at night, and all night my friends would start calling me for advice. I'm like 12 or 13. I don't know crap about crap, but I know that I have love. I know that I have passion for people, and somehow I could always come up with solutions. I was very analytical, and I always needed to know why. I was that kid that go, why? And you'd go, because I said so. That was never, ever going to work for me. I needed to understand it in depth. So when I would get these calls, I would start advising these kids on relationships and their parents and all this stuff. I'm like, what do I know? I haven't even been through anything. But yet it was a calling. It was something inside of me that felt that need to be of service to others, and I couldn't shake it. So I decided at that age I was going to become a therapist. It was a very clear vision for me, and I never wavered from that vision. They nicknamed me the Shrink. My hero character was Lucy in Charlie Brown, because I thought it was so brilliant. She could set up that lemonade stand and charge 5 cents for psychiatrist, misspelled backwards. And she would just give people advice and they'd pay her. And I'd go, that's brilliant. That's fucking awesome. I'm going to do that. So I just fell right into that path. I always say that I'm blessed to have known my purpose from the beginning, because I think the majority of the struggle of our life is not knowing that. I think most people are lost and really not knowing and understanding and grasping what their passion is, what their why is. And a lot of the trauma that we experience informs that unfortunate belief that there is no why for me. In the journey of healing from trauma, and the years that I would then later face different challenges and different traumas, I began to understand that our only mission here is to figure out that why. And no matter what happens to you, no matter what you've been through, no matter what trials or tribulations, anything is possible once you know that why. And you're not always going to get a direct answer. Why did my uncle molest me? Or why was my mother an alcoholic? And why did my dad cheat on my mom and leave? And et cetera, et cetera. It's not that why, it's the why I'm experiencing this now. And what is it doing to change and alter and form me as a human being? How has it altered my psyche and my personality? How do I rise above this? How do I walk through this tragedy and this heartache? Because none of us are going to be spared. My clients will always ask me, but why? Why me? When tragedy started coming my way, I started going, why not me? What makes me any different than any other human being walking the planet? Yeah, I have tools, I have this education, I have all that crap now. But when horrifying things happening to you, none of that stuff alters how it changes you intrinsically, inherently, in your DNA, in your cells, and every fiber of your being. You're being transformed. And there's no answer to that is going to change the experience that you're having. So for me, I became very passionate about healing that wounding for myself and for anybody that I would encounter, be it clients, be it friends, be it family members. And so I went after trauma, like very early on in my career. I wanted to treat trauma more than anything, because I understood that was the thing that was changing lives. And it wasn't being talked about in the 80s when I came up. It was just getting on the scene. Codependency was just getting on the scene. Pia Mellody and Melody Beattie, John Bradshaw, these are the gurus back in the day. Claudia Black bringing onto the scene of incest and child molestation and all this stuff. And these were things you never heard of, you never talked about. It happened somewhere very remote and far away from you. And then we start discovering and doing analysis and statistics, finding it's like 1 out of every 3 females, 1 out of every 5 to 6 males that have experienced some kind of sexual trauma in their life. And what I came to understand was it's probably only 1 out of every 6 males because the males are underreporting, not because it's happening any less to them than the females. And so this is all the information I'm starting to hear as a young therapist coming in, sitting in the rooms with men and women who are now being incarcerated for their drug addiction, felony, possessions, et cetera, not because they grew up and said, ooh, let me be a criminal. This is going to be the best part of my life, because they're running. And fearlessly, they're running away from the things that they're most frightened of. And for a lot of them, it's their history. You know, it's what's behind them. It's what they endured. And they never found that why. And they never found that ability to rise above what happened to me. How can I integrate it into myself? So instead, they learned escapism, avoidism. They learned to be angry. They learned to be resentful, but they didn't know how to make peace with it. And so for me, as I'm talking to you, gentlemen today, everything about my journey, my personal journey and my journey as a therapist was to do that, was to integrate the pain and suffering that we all have and understand this is not what defines me. This is but a moment in the experience that I get to have as a human being. And I've got to put it in its context or it will conquer me. It will eat me alive, and it will create a personality that was never meant to be. A person coping in their addiction is not who they are. It's the strategy for what they're dealing with. You can't look at a person and their active addiction and go, yeah, that's Mike. That's what Mike's like. That's what Susie. No, they're not even in their right mind. And so it's, the combination, I can't help but talk about trauma without talking about addiction. A Gina-ism is addiction is trauma. And if you never had it, you have it now, because they're infused together. I, in the beginning, never wanted to work with addiction. I was like, I don't want to work with those people, right? And my recovery is codependency, because all I did was attract the addict and the alcoholic. My first marriage was to a dry addict, of course, and I was going to save him and I was going to rescue him and I'm going to change his life. And that didn't work out so great. But I learned about myself, what I was doing. My brother was the addict and alcoholic in the family, who I chased to the ends of the earth because I adored him. And I'm seeking validation and love from a brother who's lost in a disease. My parents are busy. My dad has one physical illness after another. My mother's a warrior and panicking and trying to, pay the bills. And I'm chasing the addict and the alcoholic because I want somebody to see me and love me. And he's the least capable of doing that. So through the years of unpeeling those layers, it finally dawned on me sitting in a men's group, and I was about to do a psychodrama. I'm plugging in my computer because it's saying low battery and I'm completely plugged in, which is very odd. So let me switch I don't want to lose you guys right in the middle of that story. So anyway, so I'm chasing my brother. I'm going to be moving around because it looks like that plug is dead. I'm chasing my brother. Now you're really going to see the full Gina layout. And he's in the throes of his addiction. And what I come to discover is, he's running from what's ailing him. He's suffering. He's in pain. He's angry. We're charged. He doesn't know how to deal with that anger. And so I try to keep up with him. There's a period of time where I'm experimenting with every drug that he touches. I'm going to look at me. Don't you love me now? I mean, that really speaks to how sick my codependency was. And I start to notice I don't care for it. It's not doing for me what it's doing for him. I'm bored out of my mind, which is a funny thing to say. And then I get tired of it and say, this is not for me. I'm not doing this anymore. And I stop chasing him. He continues on his path. By the grace of God, I will say, whatever anybody's spiritual belief is, when I say God, everything that is love, power, energy, peace, understanding beyond all comprehension is what I call God. You put it in whatever context that you want. The universe, the sun, the deity throughout your religious beliefs, because to me, we are God. As long as we're breathing and we're living, God is within us. And that's the connection that I have to it. So my brother came to it because he got on his knees. My brother was not a spiritual or a believer in anything. And he pulled out on the side of the road one day, 26, 27 years old, I think. And he got on his knees and he prayed to God to remove the obsession, literally worked the steps without ever going to an AA or any meeting in his life. And he was relieved of that burden. And 35, 36 years later, he's still sober today. But what I knew was I was avoiding being in relationship with him again, when as a therapist, I kept saying, I don't want to deal with addicts. It was just avoiding a part of my story that I hadn't healed yet. So the universe and God having the sense of humor it has, every time I stepped in a room, I always stepped in a room with an addict or an alcoholic, because I always stepped in the room with trauma. So as long as I was working with trauma, there was no way that I was going to be able to escape, right? I had the greatest lessons and the greatest healings I ever had sitting in a room about to do a psychodrama with this male client. I think I started saying that earlier. Was the first time it dawned on me that my brother was actually an addict. I had never named it. He had never called it that. He simply said, I got on my knees, I prayed to God that I would never drink again, and I stopped. And that was it. There was no, we're going to program, we're going to Al-Anon, you're going to AA. It was just, oh, okay, it was this pronouncement. But sitting in that room with that male client who so much reminded me of him, you know, oh, I could have had a V8. I was like, dear God, this is why I avoided dealing with, you know, the disease of alcoholism, because I didn't want to look at it. And I didn't want to look at what happened to me. I didn't want to look at the lengths I was willing to go to chase my own addiction, which was the need for validation, love, and esteem. And I didn't realize how deprived I was of it, you know? And you guys flag me, interrupt me, tell me what you need me to do in terms of time, because I'll just keep going. But I came to know that where I grew up with these beautiful parents that always loved me, there was many things I missed, and I wasn't aware that I had missed these things. And it was what I like to call being affirmed, or when your emotional needs are not met, you will experience trauma. So trauma isn't just a tragic, catastrophic, life-threatening event. It's, I'm being ignored. I'm never held or touched. No one ever tells me they love me. I don't feel respected. I'm abandoned. Like, there's so many other ways you experience trauma that we go, well, that's just how I grew up. A kid with a single parent home where the mother or the father were lovely, beautiful people, but never there because they had to work 2 or 3 jobs. It's not that you're blaming them, it's that you're owning and honoring my experience was very different than other people's, and some of my basic needs didn't get met. I didn't feel seen, I didn't feel heard, I didn't feel loved. And to me, that's that emptiness inside of us that comes from missing those pieces is why it's a big part of the why we choose food or gambling or sex or love or drugs. Besides the, you know, genetic predispositions to all that, there's psychological dispositions to all that, you know?
Gina, question for you. Sorry to interrupt you, but we only have a couple minutes. I want to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, can you define, because I think trauma is a word that some people hear, a lot of people hear and don't understand. Right. So how would you explain it? And you don't have to define it, but how would you tell somebody who doesn't understand what trauma is, and maybe you have the definition in your head, but that might be the biblical one, if you will, or the Webster version, but define trauma. How would you explain it to somebody?
In the context of the therapeutic world, or in psychotherapeutic terms, we say trauma is anytime someone experiences a catastrophic or life-threatening event and or is a witness. So then that would be, you know, a tsunami or a flood or a hurricane. It would be rape, it would be assault, it would be domestic violence, sexual abuse, physical abuse. So the things that are obvious. The less subtle traumas are the emotional ones. And that's why I gave that definition. Pia Mellody coined it anything less than nurturing was Pia Melody's definition of trauma. And I heard that, and that resonated with me because I hadn't been physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. So I never understood why I related to the shame of being a trauma survivor. And I just expanded to, when your emotional needs go unmet, you feel as if somehow you've missed a piece of your development. Something in you did not develop the way that it was meant to, and that is traumatic for you.
So is it safe to say then that if somebody, because when you talk about that, for example, let's say you're at a football game and you see two people fighting, and all of a sudden it hits the big screen and you're exposed to that, if it's almost like being in a crowd, there's a hypnotist on the stage, and some people, they want to make sure nobody didn't get hypnotized. So technically, if I'm understanding you correctly, somebody who suffers from that, then the term untreated trauma is what we deal with, in our world of treatment, because we talk to people about, you may have untreated trauma. You maybe have some scars, some catastrophic events. So untreated trauma is simply somebody who actually, it's not like a cut and a scab. Trauma goes to the heart and the emotions and just doesn't evaporate on its own. It goes somewhere, correct?
Right.
Within the body.
What's terrifying of that is you bring up an example of being at a football game and witnessing a violent event. What's sad is we all watched the Oscars, and I hate to bring it up, but we watched a violent event, and it was passed over and pacified in a sense that we should all just tolerate it without giving it its proper course. It doesn't matter to what extent the violence was, it's still an act of violence, and we were still all privy and witness to that. So I had a lot of clients and even staff members that week come to me shaken up about it and horrified, feeling that it was the typical response when someone is a perpetrator, is that, especially if they're a good guy, is for everybody to go, that didn't really happen, really, or it's not really that bad. That is what witnessing trauma feels like, and it's what we call vicarious trauma. I'm having a trauma by watching you be traumatized. I'm having a trauma because I'm watching my mom get beaten by my dad, and I'm in the room and it's not happening to me, but everything in me feels as if I'm experiencing the same thing.
Yeah.
And trauma is experienced in a cellular level. There's many, many, many studies about how our body literally, just like any kind of a stressor, your body sends out chemicals to protect you from the stressor. So anytime you experience trauma, you do have an alternate experience physiologically.
Okay.
Absolutely.
A question I have for you, and we have about 2 minutes left.
Sure.
What is a question that you would like to be asked that you just don't get asked?
Wow. Why do I have to work on my past? Why do I have to look at my past? Why does it matter? Why can't I just go on?
Okay, here's an easy one. If you had a magic wand, then I'm gonna turn over to Mike. If you had a magic wand, what would you do with the planet right now to make it a safer or peaceful, balanced place?
If I had a magic wand that could touch the world, I would want every human to experience healing from every hurt and every trauma that they ever experienced in their life, so that then they could be the person they were actually intended to be, not the persona that they're actually behaving as.
Right. Michael?
Gina, I was just going to ask you a question. It's something that we've discussed before on the show, and I just want to get your opinion on it. A lot of times when somebody is ill, have mental illness like bipolar or schizophrenia, they'll self-medicate, and that is what leads to addiction in that aspect. But going into recovery, often the recovery centers will not let you use medications. So you would think that the people with bipolar or schizophrenia, depression, or whatever underlying cause of their illness is, would be treated for that. But they say no. It just blows my mind that they would take someone off their medication to treat them for addiction. What do you feel about that?
What I feel about that is when someone has been diagnosed and properly assessed for a severe mood disorder or personality disorder, such as bipolar personality disorder or schizophrenia, it is unkind to not allow them to receive all the assistance that is necessary to stabilize them, and that includes medication. We don't need to throw a pill at everybody for everything. We do need to allow people to detox and let them settle and see what they really have. What I experience more is that everybody coming out of detox gets diagnosed with bipolar, severe anxiety disorder, all these disorders, when if you give them another 30 days, they might not have any of that. But when there's long-term evidence of behaviors such as is very evident in a bipolar disorder with mania and severe suicidal depression, or a severe depression, when there's just long-term history of that and there's so much evidence of it in a person's life, it is unconscionable not to support them with everything you have, and that includes proper medication. So I remember the days before Dual Diagnosis Anonymous, where if you went into the anonymous program and you were on medication, it was like you were shunned, you know. We've come a little further away from that to have that understanding. A schizophrenic has to be medicated, a bipolar has to be medicated. You name two of the two that I, in 36 years, have never seen function without medication, or they will use illicit substances to survive. They will. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I'm bipolar, and I dealt with using medications in my youth.
Absolutely.
So I did everything from acid to marijuana
Absolutely.
to whatever I
Yeah.
could find, and it was all just a goal to get high and forget about what was going on. Okay, so
100%.
what we want to do now is for you to see us out of our show with a fabulous quote that you have. Why don't you give us a quote, and we'll say goodnight.
Okay. Whatever I need to do to be okay with me is absolute perfection.